Today we are going to talk about port forwarding. So what is port forwarding? Port forwarding is a technique that allows external devices to get access of a computer service that is on a private network. To understand port forwarding better, we need to know some of the basics of computer networks like IP addresses, public networks, private networks, and ports. So what is an IP address? An IP address or Internet Protocol address is a numerical representation that uniquely identifies a specific interface of a device on the network. There are two types of IP addresses, the IPv4 and the IPv6. For this video, let's consider only IPv4 addresses. It is a 32-bit address. These IP addresses are very important as the whole internet is dependent on it. It is just like mail, as every house has a mail address to receive mails. Similarly, every device that wants to connect to the internet needs an IP address to get access. Now let's imagine everyone in this world has a device to connect to the internet, but IPv4 addresses are limited to only 4,294,967,296. So if my calculations are correct, then everyone in this world cannot connect to the internet at the same time. To solve this, the IP addresses are divided into networks, the public IP addresses and the private IP addresses. And a new technology called network address translation, or in short NAT, was introduced. Now, the so-called network of IP addresses, the public networks, could only communicate over the internet, but the private IP address networks could not do the same. So these IP addresses needed to be translated to a public address. And as the private addresses could not go over the internet, these same addresses was and can be still used by many users at the same time. So how does this work? So basically, let's say you have a network of private IP addresses, but you cannot use these IP addresses to go to the internet. So what do? You translate the IP addresses to a public IP address using NAT, or network address translation. So every private IP address on your network is going to be translated to a defined public IP address with which it can go to the internet. So you get one public IP address for all your devices, and thus limiting the shortage of IP addresses. Now coming back to the house analogy. Say you have a private IP address and your friend has a public IP address. For example, let's say you send a mail to your friend. Your friend gets that mail. But you have another friend who also, like you, has a private IP address. He tries to send specifically you a mail, but he cannot get to you because you don't have a public IP address. So here comes port forwarding. So when a mail comes to your house, if your name is written on it, the mail is sent to you. The same thing is for port forwarding. You set up port forwarding in such a manner that if a connection is coming to your public IP address with a specific port number, the packet or the connection must be forwarded to your private IP address. So what are the uses of port forwarding? We use port forwarding for many reasons. Say suppose you have more than one web server running on your private network, but you have only one public IP address. Second one will be security. You don't want to communicate your IP address to anyone else. Everyone will see that the connection is coming from a public IP address, where in turn your connection is coming from a private IP address behind the network, which increases the security of your web server much more. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching this video. Like the video if you liked it, dislike if you didn't, comment about it, share it, and as for always, subscribe to SS Tech Studios for more videos like this.